each of those, and I want you please to send that to me in an email, and please make sure you cover that off this week, and please provide a heading to the email of B2B photos. B2B photos in the header of the email, and send them through to me. We're actually going to, 1 week at a time, feature players in the game, and the photos or the images that you send through to me will actually appear on the game board. Please make sure you cover that off this week. Let's move on. Yeah, key question. What is this? I hope for most people it's a pretty obvious image. This is actually the inside of a cockpit. And prior to 9/11, for a long time, I've actually had a huge fascination with the cockpits, the inside of jumbos. And prior to 9/11, I was actually able to visit the cockpit literally dozens of times. I feel very lucky to have spent a lot of time flying and doing a lot of overseas travel. And one of my favorite things to do was actually to ask pilots to put a request, obviously through the staff, if I could sit in the cockpit for landing. I've got to tell you, one of the most exciting landings I ever saw was about a 5 a.m. landing at Heathrow Airport in London. The airport, the runway, the lights, literally looked a bit like a Christmas tree to me. And I don't know if any of you know, there's almost a lighthouse type beacon that flashes out at the planes, sort of showing them visually the direction to take to come in at the runway. And it's quite spectacular because typically there's a third seat in the cockpit, which is a spare seat, and the pilots would give me a headset and I'd listen to them communicating with ground control. But I'd also listen carefully to the messages that were coming through, and it's just amazing all the systems that they have. So that was really spectacular. But what was even more spectacular was one day I posed the question as I got on the plane, and the response came back to say, well, you're welcome to sit in the cockpit for landing, but would you like to sit in the cockpit for takeoff as well? And that was an amazing experience. And one of the things that I noticed was that the guys actually go through a checklist. Obviously, they have a whole checklist of things they've got to check and make sure that everything's in order before the plane takes off. But another thing that I noticed is that they actually set the coordinates. So typically the plane flies over very specific beacons that are on the ground. And what they'll end up doing is at the very start of the journey, they actually use the dials. The dials seem to be somewhere up top, where they actually click through a number of degrees and they start to set the coordinates for the journey before the journey even begins. And I was really fascinated. I thought a plane would just take off and sort of follow a straight line, and they'd have their hands on the steering control all the way through. Not the case. Not the case. It was really amazing. So they plot the coordinates at the beginning, and then after that, a lot of the journey is just spent monitoring the systems and making sure that everything's on track the way it needs to be. And I want you to think about that as a really cool analogy for your own business. Because the thing is, once you decide where you want to go, so if you're at point A and you want to head to point B, let's say point B is Fiji, from wherever you are, you would need to point the coordinates at Fiji, and you'd need to focus very carefully then on that destination of Fiji. Now here's a question for you. If you got the coordinates slightly wrong, or let me ask it differently, if you change the coordinates by just 2 degrees at the start of the journey, would you land up at your destination? Well, if you were at point A and you were pointing, you had set the coordinates at Fiji, and you changed the coordinates by just 2 degrees, well, you'd probably miss Nandi Airport by quite a lot. And the further you traveled, the further you would be heading away from your actual goal. So I want you to think about that as the analogy. You're at the starting point right now. I've said for the jet, the destination is Fiji, but the question I've got for you is, what's the destination for your business? How will you know when it's time to celebrate? How will you know which point you really need to be pointing not only your aeroplane, but the entire team, your efforts, your tactics? So the key thing that I really want you to think about is what is the impact of having a very specific end goal in mind? In the case of sitting in a cockpit, it's absolutely vital. You have to know exactly where you're going. So same in business, absolutely the same in business. And what I've actually prepared for you is the suggested goals that I want everybody to focus on as an absolute minimum. So let's swap over to those. And allow my voice to guide you through, but I'll actually ask you to physically open the spreadsheet that I've sent through to all of you, which is called the B2B Marketing Dashboard. So please switch over to the B2B Marketing Dashboard. And within the dashboard, there are 3 tabs at the bottom. There's the dashboard, the tactic tracker, and the targets. What I want you to focus on right now is just the targets. That's the only piece we're going to cover today. And I'll give you the context here. What I'm aiming for right here is that everybody nominates as a minimum these goals. You might have some additional ones that you want to add. You might have some extra things. But I'm recommending here that as a minimum, you start to track some of the key goals that I have in this sheet. Now, we're going for simplicity right here. So for a number of you, you will have various different product service offerings. I'm going to walk through this as though there is one key offering. One key offering, and if we sold more of it, we'd be making more profits. So I'm actually going to walk you through the process over here. And what we're trying to work out here, what we're trying to work out specifically on this sheet, is the total number of qualified prospects we require. So that's the block down here. So what we know from experience is that a lot of people tend to underestimate the number of qualified prospects required. Tend to underestimate. So a number of people get to the 3rd and the 6th month and have not met their targets. Very often it's because of an underestimation of how many qualified prospects you actually require in order to get to the goal. So let's start up at the top and ask the question of what is the total new revenue? So this is the new revenue sales target which you have for your business for this financial year. In other words, what's the total amount of new sales revenue which your company must secure in order to meet your sales goal for this year? So hopefully by now, we're into July, we're well into July. Hopefully by now you've got your head around what's the overall revenue number. I've just plugged in a really easy number here so that the maths could work out nice and simple. But make sure you include in this cell over here the actual number that you want. What's the total new revenue you want in the financial year? The next thing I want you to look at then is what's the average value of a sale in dollars for your business? Now I know there are a varied range of goods and services, but I can tell you straight away that a complex consulting project, if we were to engage, that would be $160,000 or $170,000. I know if I talk to the guys over at Creativa about videos, they've got price points for the videos. They know exactly which ones they're going to sell more of, less of, so they could rattle off the numbers to us. The question I've got for you is, what is the average value of a sale in dollars? So in other words, each time you close an average size deal for your business, not the very biggest, not the very smallest, just an average size deal, what's it worth to your business in new revenue? Now, if you're scratching your head thinking, geez, that's a big question, I've got so many things that I sell, think about the solution or the product or the service that ideally you'd like to sell a hell of a lot more of. Whatever that thing is, please estimate what's the value in revenue of closing one of those and pop the figure in here. So just for ease of this exercise, I put in the figure of $10,000. But you put the figure in that's relevant to your business, your goods and services. So what that will do is once you've popped those first 2 figures in, it will automatically actually populate this cell over here, which tells you the total number of sales that you need to close during this period. And that's simply saying what's the total amount of new sales revenue that you need divided by the average amount of revenue that's going to come in from each new sale. That will tell you how many new sales you need to close. Nice and simple. Okay, so I'm going to move down then to point 4, which is asking you, what is your required number of qualified prospects per sale? Let me explain this because it's actually really easy. It's really simple. So there's 2 aspects to this. The one is to actually qualify, to explain what is a qualified prospect, and then I'll explain what do we mean by the required number of qualified prospects per sale. So what is a qualified prospect? Well, I've actually put the definition down here. Qualified prospect is not just any person that puts their hand up and says, you got something pretty easy, interesting going on over there. What do you got? What does your business do? That's not a qualified prospect. Qualified prospect, you can call someone a qualified prospect when you have 2 out of 3 of the following things in place. So the first one is your prospect has confirmed that they actually have a budget for your goods and services. They actually have a budget in this financial year to pay for something that you might sell them. The second one is you've either got a relationship directly with the decision maker, or you have a sponsor within the prospect organization who's willing to support your sales efforts. So you're either talking to and you've got a relationship directly with the decision maker, or you've got a relationship with a sponsor, someone who's really willing to support you and to actually help you navigate progress so that you can close a sale. The sponsor is inside of the target organization. Those are the first 2. The third one is that your prospect has a time-bound compelling event. In other words, there's a time-bound reason that they must act, so they're therefore likely to take action and to actually buy a solution, whether it's from you or someone else. So if you have 2 out of those 3 key points in place on a particular opportunity, so on a particular prospect, I want you to refer to that then as a qualified prospect. So we all know you need a certain number of qualified prospects. It's the qualified prospects where a lot of your sales are going to come from. So the question that we're asking up here is, what is your required number of qualified prospects per sale? Because keep in mind, you're not going to close every single sale. Every time you have a qualified prospect, it's not always 100% of the time going to lead to a closed sale. So what we're asking here is, of a certain number of qualified prospects that you have, you're going to close 1 sale. What we're asking right here is, what is that certain number? And I'm going to ask you to be conservative here. I've put in a number of 5. In other words, from every 5 qualified prospects, you're going to close 1. Unless you already know this ratio from experience, I'm going to ask you to put in the number of 5, or to be more conservative. And more conservative will be putting 6, 7, or 8 as that number. So give that some thought. If you already know from experience, then put the number in. If you're not sure, then please work with the number of 5 or more conservative, i.e. 6 or 7, etc. A lot of people tend to underestimate the number, this number over here. They tend to think that, well, once I've got a qualified prospect, 9 out of 10 times I'm going to close the sale. But if you actually keep tabs on it, you'll notice that for a lot of businesses, 9 out of 10 is a very unlikely ratio. Yes, we get excited about it. Yes, we get enthusiastic. But be realistic, be pragmatic here. Because what this will then help you to do, the moment you pop that number in, is to actually work out the figure down here, the total number of qualified prospects that you require. Because the maths behind the spreadsheet is very simple. It's actually going to multiply the total number of sales which you need, that's this cell over here, by the required number of qualified prospects, which is this number here, to give you a total number of qualified prospects that you require. That's this number down here. Whoops. And what we can see for this particular business, then in order to meet the goal of $100,000 of new sales, the total sales that they would need is 10. And with a ratio of 1 in 5 qualified prospects actually turning into closed sales, this particular company would need 50 new qualified prospects for the year in order to meet the goal. So hopefully you've tracked with me as I've explained the sheet. What I want you to do now, and I'm going to give you a minute to do this, is just to track through these figures and to fill in your own number. So hopefully you know the figure up top here, your new revenue required. Jot in the average value of a sale, a decent sale for you. That will then work out the total number of sales that you need. Down in this line 4 over here, I want you to jot in a number over here. In other words, for every sale that you're going to close, it's line 8 that we're looking at, how many qualified prospects do you need? That will help you calculate, as per line number 12, the total number of qualified prospects that you need in order to meet your sales target for this year. So track with me here. What I'm going to show you here then is just the other two components so you know what's coming. We're not going to focus on them today, but I want you to see which way the game is tracking, which way your measurement is tracking. So if you're working in your own sheet, that's okay. I'll talk you through verbally. Alternatively, come back to the images you're seeing on the webinar and you can just watch as I show you. Where I'm going to go to here is the dashboard. So I click on the dashboard tab, and in the dashboard there are a few things. There are some very simple things that we're going to watch month by month. When I say we're going to watch, I'm going to ask you to populate the table. I may also chat with you about it. So the first one to watch is the number of Get More Leads tactics that you execute each month. I'm going to show you, and this is at the training that we're going to do on the 9th of August. I'm going to show you all the tactics that you can do and that are on the menu for the next 12 months. And the recommendation is that you're going to put at least one tactic in for each month so that you actually land up doing something that will generate leads each and every single month. Next thing to keep an eye on is the number of value add nuggets that you send to your community. Now, that might be a blog. It might be a white paper. It might be a 5 questions to ask yourself if you're thinking about whatever your topic of interest is. Something that's going to add value, something that's going to educate your audience. It's going to help them receive value, but they're going to attribute the value back to you. And it's going to help you stay front of mind with the leads that you work so hard to create up here. So here's the value add nuggets in line 8, down to line 10, 0.3 if you like. The number of new business opportunities that you created or received this month. So you want to watch each month how many new opportunities are coming through. And another key metric then to watch is the number of new members to your community this month. I'll explain as we get there what a new member of the community is. But keep in mind, all your marketing efforts are going to be trying to grow your community, grow the community of people who are buying goods and services from you, getting value from you, and ideally over time referring other people into this community of yours. What do you know? Number of new qualified prospects this month. That's just the piece we were working on before. What you're going to do here month by month is you're actually going to measure the result. How many new qualified prospects are turning up in your system, in your community for you and your business? A very important thing to think about, we'll teach you further on how to actually create structured referral channels. But something so important to think about is the number of people or companies that are actively referring qualified leads to you. Actively referring. This is not someone just has an idea and they flick someone an email and that person maybe contacts you or maybe they don't. I'm talking here about developing relationships with people or companies that will actively refer leads to you. And not just one, they'll refer several over time. So keep in mind, the moment you can turn on a lead referral channel, somebody who regularly refers leads, if you have 2 or 3 of those in your system and they all refer one qualified lead every month or 2, that's 3 or 6 leads that come through on a regular basis. Think about the impact of that on your marketing. It's huge, absolutely huge. And then the last thing that we'll ask you to watch month by month is the value of closed sales. So you can actually track month by month what is the value of closed sales in your business. This is the dashboard in its entirety. Yes, there are other things that you could watch. There are other things that you might even choose to watch. This is just at a bare minimum the most important things that we recommend you do watch. So if you don't watch all the other metrics related to your sales and marketing, strong recommendation is that you watch at least these. That's the dashboard. This is the tactic tracker, and we'll show you in a different session in detail how to use this tactic tracker so that you can monitor each of your investments in your marketing, and you can actually track the success or lack thereof for each tactic. Because remember that marketing is not a failure. No tactic is a failure unless you fail to learn from it. So a tactic might fail. That's okay, as long as you're able to take the learnings and make improvements for next time. So surprise, surprise, we're 45 minutes into a webinar that I've scheduled for